Did you know? There's a Japan-only Metroid game full of exclusive lore and had several of its story elements reused in Metroid Fusion, Zero Mission, Super Metroid, and even Metroid Prime 2? Well, kind of. Released a few months after the original Famicom Disk System game, Metroid Zebes Invasion Order was an interactive literary adaptation licensed by Nintendo and published by Futushaba in December 1986. It's sort of like a choose-your-own-adventure novel on steroids, where the reader, or more accurately the player, is constantly making choices and rolling dice, then flipping to specific pages to explore branching paths, a bit like Dungeons & Dragons. As such, this gamebook borrows many elements from tabletop RPGs, like having to use pencil and paper to keep track of Samus's health, missile count, and current location in Zebes' labyrinthian underworld. The first 3/4 of the story follows the original Metroid pretty faithfully, but the final act strikes out and forges its own path, and interestingly, seems to foreshadow events that didn't happen in the mainline series until decades later. These days, buying the book and getting it translated into English would set you back about $2,000, but we're gonna save you the trouble, and at the end of this video, we'll even show you how to play it without spending a penny. Just like the original game, space pirates have obtained a capsule of Metroid embryos and taken it to Zebes for experimentation, with the goal of creating a dangerous bioweapon. Samus is tasked with infiltrating Zebes, defeating the space pirates, and retrieving the capsule so the Federation can study it. The gameplay has Samus exploring room by room, fighting enemies, collecting new weapons and abilities, and backtracking to previous rooms so she can use those new abilities to access secret rooms and more upgrades. Zebes is made up of 3 areas connected by elevators: Brinstar, Norfair, and Torian, totaling 97 rooms, each represented by 1 page, and almost every room containing 1 enemy. To kill enemies, the player rolls a 6-sided die to determine if they kill an enemy or if it damages Samus. If it doesn't die on the first roll, the player keeps rolling until either it or Samus are dead. Using missiles, or more powerful beam upgrades acquired throughout your adventure, gives you better dice rolling odds in combat, and eventually, the Various suit will double Samus's defenses, cutting damage in half. Later in your playthrough, you'll want to backtrack to the beginning to hunt for upgrades, and with a slew of new abilities, Samus makes quick work of enemy types that might have killed her just a few hours earlier, and she can use newly acquired upgrades like bombs to gain access to new areas. Zebes Invasion Order is incredibly difficult, but when Samus dies, she's at least sent back to the beginning of the area she died in with all of her upgrades still intact. The gamebook is surprisingly faithful to the video game, so much so that some Metroid speedrunning strats can be used with the book. Instead of backtracking room by room all the way across the map, sometimes it's easier just to die on purpose and get sent back to the start of an area, which is known as a death warp in speedrunning. Keeping track of Samus's health, missiles, and the map can grow tiresome, but the Metroid formula's conversion into a gamebook is really quite genius. Some decisions stand out as particularly creative adaptations of the video game's core mechanics. For example, sometimes you'll come across a room with a secret entrance to a hidden room. To access it, you'll need to flip to the page in the book that represents the hidden room, but the page itself is also hidden. You're told the page number, but with 1 digit missing, so you'll have to hunt through the book to find it. And you're usually well compensated when you do, with the secret rooms having some of the best items, like missile expansions, energy tanks, and the screw attack. Up to this point, Zebes Invasion Order mirrors the Famicom Disk System title, but with a few notable differences. In the game, Zebes is a planet, but the gamebook refers to Zebes as an asteroid. A little extra lore was added as well, like how Mother Brain's been experimenting on Zebes' indigenous creatures and grafting cybernetic enhancements onto them. The book also expands on Ridley's abilities, giving him psychic abilities that accentuate the pain caused by his fire attacks. Creed and Ridley are also holding keystones that are required to unlock the path to Torian, which explains why Samus can't head straight to Mother Brain right from the start. After killing Mother Brain and retrieving the Metroid capsule, Samus climbs out an escape shaft and flies away in her spaceship. At this point, the game changes completely. You're no longer required to keep track of Samus's stats or location, and gameplay shifts into a more traditional choose-your-own-adventure format. The gamebook's story goes down its own path for the final act, adding some extra twists and turns, some of which made their way into future mainline installments. As Samus flees in her ship, she realizes one of the capsule's embryos broke out and developed into a gigantic, mutated Metroid. This new story element was presumably inspired by the end of the 1979 film Alien, where Ripley finds the xenomorph stowed away on her escape pod. Perhaps more interestingly, this was the first time Metroid fans ever got to see a mutated Metroid, and the same could be said for Samus' spaceship. Neither were in the original game, and both made their video game debut 5 years later in Metroid 2: Return of Samus. With the mutant Metroid bearing down on her, the player has 2 choices: send out a distress signal from the cockpit, or flee in an escape pod. Either way, way, she's eventually forced to dock in a giant ship belonging to the space pirates, in a situation very similar to the extra chapter added to Metroid Zero Mission. However, one major difference is that the gamebook's author depicted the space pirates as humans, since they weren't revealed as aliens until 8 years later in Super Metroid. The space pirates capture Samus and their boss pulls off her helmet, revealing that, gasp, Samus is a woman! The pirates are all shocked it was actually a woman who destroyed their base on Zebes, and the pirate boss is even, quote, horrified by the revelation. What happens next branches off into 8 different endings. 6 of those endings result in Samus getting killed by either the Metroid or at the hands of the space pirates. Of the 2 endings where Samus survives, the bad ending occurs if you try to escape without risking your life to retrieve the capsule and complete your mission. If you make that mistake, you're treated to a conclusion very similar to the end of Metroid Fusion. Samus flees to the docking bay but gets intercepted by the mutant Metroid at the last second, and after she kills it in the equivalent of a final boss battle, she escapes in a small craft and fires a missile that destroys the pirate ship. But as Samus flies into the distance, the mutant Metroid can be seen latched onto her ship, implying she might die off screen soon after. In the good ending, Samus faces off against the pirate boss in a sword fight, culminating in the boss getting killed by Samus or defeated and left to get killed by the mutant. Either way, Samus takes the capsule and escapes on the small craft, fires a missile destroying the pirate ship, and flies off with the Metroid capsule. Mission complete. After it's all said and done, the player's treated to an epilogue where a meteorite lands on Earth, and although nothing's found at the impact crater, several human corpses are found nearby with the life drained from their bodies. It's implied that unbeknownst to the locals, the crashed object was actually the mutant Metroid, who developed a hateful obsession for Samus and came to Earth to hunt her down. A dark and foreboding cliffhanger for a sequel that never got made. Although, it's worth noting, the idea of a heavily mutated Metroid viewing Samus as its arch-nemesis and coming after her again and again later found its way into Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Zebes Invasion Order features quite a few original plot lines that have influenced future games, but it's unclear if the developers took direct inspiration from the game book, or if all these similarities are just a coincidence. Zebes Invasion Order borrows story beats from the Alien movies, and the same can be said for the video games, so perhaps the parallels are simply the result of a shared inspiration. Regardless, it's interesting to see similar events play out in the book years or even decades before they happen in the games. Copies of Zebes Invasion Order have become increasingly rare and expensive over the past 35 years, to the point where it's hard to find a listing for one at any price. But one fan who was able to get his hands on a copy was Devin Monins, aided in no small part by the Game Preservation Society in Japan. Over the course of several years, Devin translated Zebes Invasion Order and converted it into a playable text adventure. It's now freely available on Metroid Database, so if you want to give it a try, we'll leave a link in this video's description. Devin even streamlined it so the game keeps track of Samus's health, missiles, and the map all on its own, so you don't have to resort to pencil and paper unless you're feeling like a purist. This is actually how we played the game, though the quality of life features were disabled to best replicate the authentic experience of playing the gamebook. Did you also know that a Metroid movie was being developed for years before being cancelled? For more on that, check out the video on screen. And if you wanted to hear about more Metroid from yours truly, I'm Wayneisboss, and on my channel, October is Metroid month, so click the other video on screen if you want to watch a full month of Metroid. Thanks for tuning in, folks. See you next time.